The year was 1981. Nestled in the Northern California mountains is a sleepy little town called Keddie. At the time, it was little more than a rundown former resort. The cabins were old, cold, and barely kept up. But for some families, like the Sharps, it was the only place they could afford. The Sharp family had just moved there a year earlier. The mother, Glenna Susan Sharp, who went by Sue, was trying to start over. She was 36 years old, recently divorced. She had left Connecticut with her 5 children and driven across the country to California. Sue was doing her best to raise the kids on her own. They lived in cabin 28. Her oldest son, John, was 15. He was quiet, a little rebellious, but close with his younger siblings. Her second son, Rick, was 10. Then came Greg, who was just 5. Her oldest daughter, Sheila, was 14. The youngest, Tina, was 12. Life in cabin 28 wasn't easy, but they made the best of it. April 11th, 1981, felt just like any other day. That evening, Sue was chilling at home with Rick, Greg, and Tina. Meanwhile, John, their oldest, was out hitchhiking with his buddy, 17-year-old Dana Wingate. Sheila, Sue's daughter, had been invited for a sleepover next door at cabin 27. She said goodnight to her family and left for the night. Sometime later, John and Dana returned to the Sharp home, but by morning, everything had changed. On April 12th, around 7 a.m., Sheila walked back to cabin 28. She opened the door and stepped into a nightmare. The living room was covered in blood. 3 bodies are on the floor. Her brother John, his friend Dana, and her mom, Sue. They had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords. All 3 had been beaten brutally. They had also been stabbed multiple times. Sue was found lying on her side. She was partially covered with a yellow blanket. Her hands and ankles were bound. She had been gagged, and her throat was slit so deeply she was nearly decapitated. John and Dana had suffered similar attacks. Dana's head was crushed. Some reports say that he was suffocated, while others say he choked on his own blood. It was clear that the murders were not quick. Whoever had done this took their time. Even stranger, 3 of the children had survived. Rick and Greg, just 10 and 5 years old, were found unharmed. They had been sleeping in the back bedroom. With them was a friend, 12-year-old Justin, who had spent the night. The boys said they didn't hear anything. But later, Justin gave a strange account. He said he had a dream, or maybe a memory of hearing noises. He said he saw 2 men. One had a mustache and short hair. The other had long hair and sunglasses. In the dream, one man was holding a hammer. The other had a knife. Police were never sure if Justin actually witnessed something or if he imagined it. But there was one more mystery. Tina was missing. She wasn't in the house. She wasn't outside. She was just gone. Police assumed she had been taken by the killer. But why? Why would someone kill 3 people and kidnap a 12-year-old girl? The investigation was slow and full of mistakes. The crime scene wasn't secured. People walked in and out of the cabin. Evidence was lost. Items were touched without gloves. Still, there were some clues. There were 2 different knives left behind. One was bent from the force of the stabbings. There was also a bloody hammer. Bloodstains were found on the walls, the furniture, even the ceiling, but there were no clear fingerprints, no forced entry, and no obvious motive. Soon, suspicion fell on a man named Martin Smart. He lived just a few cabins down, in cabin 26. He was known to police. He had a short temper and a history of violence. Martin lived with his wife Marilyn and their son Justin, the boy who had been sleeping at the Sharps' cabin. In an interview, Martin's wife said something strange. She claimed Martin had gotten rid of a hammer shortly after the murders. She also said he had talked about the killings in a way that made her feel uneasy. Sometime later, Martin reportedly confessed to a therapist. He said, "I killed Sue and Tina, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys." But even with all of this, he was never arrested. Police didn't follow up on the tip until years later. By then, Martin had moved away. He died in 2000. Another suspect, Martin's friend Boo Abu Bede, also died before he could be questioned properly. For years, the case went cold. Then, in 1984, 3 years after the murders, there was a disturbing discovery. A bottle collector walking through the woods about 30 miles away from Keddie found a human skull. It was later confirmed to be Tina Sharp. Right next to the skull, they found bits of clothing and a child's blanket. Someone even called in to share the exact spot. But even after Tina's remains were found, there were no arrests. No one came forward. No one was ever charged. In the years that followed, people moved on. Keddie faded into the background. Cabin 28 stood for a while, but was eventually torn down. It was as if someone wanted to erase what happened there. But some people never gave up. In 2013, new investigators began looking at the case again. They found a hammer buried in a nearby pond. It matched the description of the one Martin Smart had owned. They also found evidence that the original sheriff's office had mishandled the investigation and possibly covered up leads. By 2018, DNA evidence was being retested with modern technology. New interviews were conducted. Some people who were silent for years finally spoke. There's now reason to believe that multiple people were involved, that the killers knew the family, and that the attack was personal. But even with all of this, no one has ever been charged. Today, the Keddie Cabin Murders remained one of California's most haunting cold cases. 3 people were murdered. A 12-year-old girl was kidnapped, killed, and left in the woods. The killers may have been neighbors, friends, people the family trusted, and yet, they were never brought to justice. The case is still open. Investigators believe it can be solved, but for now, the truth remains buried somewhere in the quiet forests of Northern California.